Wysteria, energy, twister.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Legends of Britany. So we're now on the lay of Gugemar, and it's a little bit longer than the others, so I apologise, but we shall see how we go. Oradile was one of the chief barons of King Arthur, and dwelt in Britanny, where he held lands in fief of that monarch. So deeply was he attached to his liege lord, that when his son Gugemar was yet a child, he sent him to Arthur's court to be trained as a page. In due time Arthur dubbed Gugemar knight and armed him in rich harness, and the youth, hearing of war in Flanders, set out for that realm in the hope of gaining distinction and knightly honour. After achieving many valorous deeds in Flanders, Gugemar felt a strong desire to behold his parents once more. So setting his face homeward, he journeyed back to Brittany and dwelt with them for some time, resting after his battles and telling his father, mother and sister Nogent of the many enterprises in which he had been engaged. But he shortly grew weary of this inactive existence, and in order to break the monotony of it, he planned a great hunt in the neighbouring forest. Early one morning he set out, and soon a tall stag was roused from its bed among the ferns by the noise of the hunter's horns. The hounds were unleashed, and the entire hunt followed in pursuit, Gugemar the foremost of all. But closely as he pursued, the quarry eluded the knight, and to his chagrin he was left alone in the forest, spaces with nothing to show for his long chase. He was about to ride back in search of his companions, when on a sudden he noticed a doe hiding in the thicket with her fawn. She was white from ear to hoof, without a spot. Gugemar's hounds, rushing at her, held her at bay, and their master, fitting an arrow to his bow, loosed a shaft at her, so that she was wounded above the hoof and brought to earth. But the treacherous arrow, glancing, returned to Gugemar and wounded him grievously in the thigh. As he lay on the earth faint, with his senses almost deserting him, Gugemar heard the doe speak to him in human accents. "Wretch, who hast slain me," said she, "think not to escape my vengeance. Never shall leech, nor herb, nor balm cure the wound which fate hath so justly inflicted upon thee. Only canst thou be healed by a woman who loves thee, and who for that love shall have to suffer such woe and sorrow as never woman had to endure before. Thou too shalt suffer equally with her, and the sorrows of ye twain shall be the wonder of lovers for all time. Leave me now to die in peace." Gugemar was in sore dismay at hearing these words, for never had he sought lady's love, nor had he cared for the converse of women. Winding his horn, he succeeded in attracting one of the followers to the spot, and sent him in search of the companions. When he had gone, Gugemar tore his linen shirt into pieces and bound up his wound as well as he might. Then, dragging himself most painfully into the saddle, he rode from the scene of his misadventure at a great pace, as his injury would permit of, for he had conceived a plan which he did not desire should be interfered with. Riding at a head gallop, he soon came in sight of tall cliffs which overlooked the sea, and which formed a natural harbour, wherein lay a vessel richly beseen. Its sails were of spun silk, and each plank and mast was fashioned of ebony. Dismounting, Gugemar made his way to the shore, and with much labour climbed upon the ship. Neither mariner nor merchant was therein. A large pavilion of silk covered part of the deck, and within this was a rich bed, the work of the cunning artificers of the days of King Solomon. It was fashioned of cypress wood and ivory, and much gold, many a gem went into the making of it. 2 clothes with which it was provided were fair and white as snow, and so soft the pillow that he who laid his head upon it, sad as he might be, could not resist sleep. The pavilion was lit by 2 large waxen candles set in candlesticks of gold. As the knight sat gazing at this splendid couch, fit for a king, he suddenly became aware that the ship was moving seaward. Already, indeed, he was far from land, and at the sight he grew more sorrowful than before, for his hurt made him helpless, and he could not hope either to guide the vessel or manage her so that he might return to shore. Resigning himself to circumstances, he lay down upon the ornate bed and sank into a deep and dreamless slumber. When he awoke, he found, to his intense surprise, that the ship had come to a port of an ancient city. Now the king of this realm was an aged man, who was wedded to a young fair lady, of whom he was after the manner of old men, intensely jealous. The castle of this monarch frowned upon a fair garden enclosed from the sea by a high wall of green marble, so that if one desired to come to the castle, he must do so from the water only. The place was straitly watched by vigilant warders, and within the wall, carefully defended, lay the queen's bower, a fairer chamber than any beneath the sun, and decorated with the most marvellous paintings. Here dwelt the young queen with one of her ladies, her own sister's child, who was devoted to her service and who never quitted her side. The key of this bower was in the hands of the aged priest, who was also the queen's servitor. One day, on awaking from sleep, the queen walked in the garden and espied a ship drawing near the land. Suddenly, she knew not why, she grew very fearful, and would have fled at the sight, but her maiden encouraged her to remain. The vessel came to shore, and the queen's maiden entered it. No one could she see on board except a knight sleeping soundly within the pavilion, and he was so pale that she thought he was dead. Returning to her mistress, she told her what she had seen, and together they entered the vessel. No sooner did the queen behold Gugemar than she was deeply smitten with love for him. In a transport of fear lest he were dead, she placed her hand upon his bosom, and was overjoyed to feel the warmth of life within him, and that his heart beat strongly. At her touch he awoke, and courteously saluted her. She asked him whence he came, and to what nation he belonged. "Lady," he replied, "I am a knight of Britanny, but yesterday, or so it seems to me, for I may have slumbered more than a day, I wounded a deer in the forest, but the arrow with which I slew her rebounded and struck me sorely. Then the beast, being, I trow, a fairy deer, spake, saying that never would this wound be healed, save by one damsel in the whole world, and her I know not where to find. Riding seaward, I came to where this ship lay moored, and entering it, the vessel drifted oceanward. I know not to what land I have come, nor what name this city bears. I pray you, fair lady, give me your best counsel." The queen listened to his tale with the deepest interest, and when Gugemar made his appeal, which is what they did back then, For aid and counsel she applied. Truly, fair sir, I shall counsel you as best I may. This city to which you have come belongs to my husband, who is its king. Of much worship is he, but stricken in years, and because of the jealousy he bears me, he has shut me up between two high walls. If it please you, you may tarry here while we tend your wound until it is healed. Gugemar, wearied and bewildered at the strange things which had happened to him in the space of a day, thanked the queen and accepted her kind offer of entertainment with alacrity. Between them, the queen and her lady assisted him to leave the ship and bore him to the chamber, where he was laid in a fair bed, and had his wound carefully dressed. When the ladies had withdrawn, and the knight was left to himself, he knew that he loved the queen. All memory of his home and even of his tormenting wound disappeared, and he could brood only upon the fair face of the royal lady who had so charmingly ministered to him. Meanwhile, the queen was in little better case. All night she could not sleep for pondering upon the handsome youth who had come so mysteriously into her life, and her maiden, seeing this, and marking how she suffered, went to Gugemar's chamber and told him in a frank and almost childlike manner how deeply her mistress had been smitten with love for him. "You are young," she said. "So is my lady. Her lord is old, and their union is unseemly. Heaven intended you for one another and has brought you together in its own good time." Shortly after she heard mass, the queen summoned Gugemar into her presence. At first both were dumb with confusion. At last his passion urged Gugemar to speak, and his love words came thick and fast, and the queen hearkened to them, and, feeling that they rang true, admitted that she loved him in return. For a year and a half Gugemar dwelt in the queen's bower. Then the lovers met with misfortune. For some days before the blow fell the queen had experienced a feeling of coming evil. So powerfully did this affect her that she begged Gugemar for a garment of his. The knight marvelled at the request and asked her playfully for what reason she desired such a keepsake as a linen shirt. "Friend," she replied, "if it chances that you leave me, or that we are separated, I shall fear that some other damsel may win your love. In this shift which you give me, I shall make a knot, and shall ask you to vow that never will you give your love to dame or damsel who cannot untie this knot." The knight complied with her request, and she made such a cunning knot in the garment as only she could unravel. For his part, Gugemar gave the queen a wonderfully fashioned girdle, which only he could unclasp, and he begged her that she would never grant her love to any man who could not free her from it. Each promised the other solemnly to respect the vows they had made. That same day their hidden love was discovered. A chamberlain of the king's observed them through a window of the queen's bower, and hastening to his master, told him what he had seen. In terrible wrath the king called for his guards, and coming upon the lovers unaware, commanded them to slay Gugemar at once. But the knight seized upon a stout rod of firewood, on which linen was wont to be dried, and faced those who would slay him so boldly that he fell back in dismay. The king questioned him as to his name and lineage, and Gugemar fearlessly related his story. The king was incredulous at first, but said that, could the ship be found in which Gugemar had arrived, he would place him upon it and send him once more to the sea. After search had been made, the vessel was found. Gugemar was placed on it. The ship began to move, and soon the knight was well at sea. Ere long the ship came to that harbour whence she had first sailed, and as Gugemar landed, he saw to his surprise one of his own vessels, holding a charger and accompanied by a knight. Mounting the steed, Gugemar swiftly rode home, where he was received with every demonstration of joy. But though his parents and friends did everything possible to make him happy, the memory of the fair queen, who had loved him, was ever with him night and day, so that he might not be solaced by game or tilting, the chase or the dance. In vain those who wished him well urged him to take a wife. At first he roundly refused to consider such a step, but when eagerly pressed by his friends, he announced that no wife should be wed who could not first unloose the knot within his shift. So sought after was Gugemar that all the damsels in Brittany essayed the feat, but none of them succeeded, and such retired sorrowfully from the ordeal. Meanwhile, the aged king had set his wife in the tower of the grey marble, where she suffered agonies because of the absence of a lover. Ever she wondered what had happened to him, if he had regained his native shore, or whether he had been swallowed up by the angry sea. Frequently she made loud moans that were none to hear her cries, save stormy-hearted growlers, who were as dumb as the grey walls that enclosed her. One day she chanced to Dolor to lean heavily upon the door of the prison. To her amazement it opened, and she found herself in the corridor. Without hastening her impulse, and as if by instinct, to the harbour, she found there her lover's ship. Quickly she climbed upon its deck, and scarcely had she done so than the vessel began to move seaward. In the great fear she sat still, and in time was wafted to a part of Brittany governed by one named Meriados, who was on the point of going to war with a neighbouring chieftain. From his window Meriados had seen the approach of the strange vessel. Making his way to the seashore, entered the ship. Struck with the beauty of the queen, he brought her to his castle, where he placed her in his sister's chamber. He strove in every way to dispel the sadness which seemed to envelop her like a mantle, but despite his efforts to please her, she remained in sorrowful and doleful mood, and would not be comforted. Sorely did Meriados press her to wed him, but she would not have none of him, and for answer showed him the girdle round her waist, saying that never would she give her love to any man who could not unloose its buckle. As she said this, Meriados seemed struck by her words. "Strange," he said, "a right worthy knight dwells in this land, who will take no woman to his wife, save she who can first untie a certain crafty knot in his shaft. Well would I wager that it was you who tied the knot." When the queen heard those words, well nigh fainted. Meriados rushed to secure her, and gradually she revived. Some days later, Meriados held a high tournament, at which all knights who were to aid him in the war were to be present, among them Gugemar. A festival was held on the night preceding the tournament, of which Meriados requested his sister and the stranger dame to be present. As the queen entered the hall, Gugemar rose from his place and stared at her as a vision of dead. In great doubt was he whether this lady was in truth his beloved. "Come, Gugemar," called Meriados, "let this damsel try to unravel a knot in your shift which you puzzled so many fair dames." Gugemar called to his squire and bade him fetch the shift, and when it was brought the young lady, without seeming effort, unravelled the knot. But even yet Gugemar remained very uncertain. "Lady," he said, "tell me, I pray you, whether or not you wear a girdle with which I girt you in the realm across the sea." Placing his hands around her slender waist, he found there the secret belt. All his doubts dispelled, Gugemar asked his loved one how she had come to the tower of Meriados. When he had heard, he then and there requested his ally to yield him the lady, but the chieftain roundly refused. Then the knight in great anger cast down his glove and took his departure, and to the discomfiture of Meriados, all those knights who had gathered for the tournament and offered to assist Meriados accompanied Gugemar. In a body they rode to the castle of the prince who was at war with Meredith. The next day they marched against the discourteous chieftain. Long did they besiege his castle, but at last, when the defenders were weak with hunger, Gugemar and his men assailed the place and took it, slaying Meredith within the ruins of his own hall. Gugemar, rushing to that place, where he knew his lady to be, called her forth, and in peace brought her back with him to his own domain, where they were wed and dwelt long and happily. There are several more circumstances connected with this beautiful old tale, which deeply impress with a belief in its antiquity. The incident of the killing of a deer and the incurable nature of Gugemar's wound are undoubtedly legacies from very ancient times, when it was believed to be unlucky under certain circumstances to kill a beast of the chase. Some savage races consider it to be most unlucky to slay a deer without first propitiating the great deer god, the chief of the deer folk, and in fact they attribute most of the ills to which flesh is heir to the likelihood that they would omitted some of the very involved ritual of the chase. It will be remembered that Tristram also had an incurable wound, and there are other like instances in romance and myth, many other. Lastly, the means adapted by the lovers to ensure one another's constancy seems very like the methods of taboo. The knot that may not or cannot be untied has many counterparts in ancient law, and the girdle that no man but the accepted lover may loose is reminiscent of the days when a man placed such a girdle round his wife or sweetheart to signify his sole possession of her. If a man could succeed in purloining a mermaid's girdle, she was completely in his power. So it is with the fairies in an Algonquin Indian tale. Even so late as crusading times, many knights departing to fight in the Holy Land bound a girdle round their ladies' waists, in hope that the girdle would ensure their faithfulness. And that is the love story of Gugemar and his queen. Interesting indeed. Thank you for listening to this part of Legends of Britany, and many blessings.
Wysteria. Energy. Twister.